Okay, we are live now.
Thank you, Jacob, and thank you, Mayor and Council, for tonight's January 25th Council briefing. I will turn the first item over to Human Resources Director Ann Muse. Ann, the floor is yours.
Hello there, everybody can hear me? Okay. Well, congratulations, Mike. This is your second anniversary as our city manager. You're number 2. And as a part of the city manager's contract, there's a requirement that his performance gets reviewed on an annual basis. And as you all got copies of the summaries that I did for Mike's review, we started firstly with department directors who provided it their review of Mike based on his supervision and other management duties in relationship to their operations. And I summarized that and gave it to you guys. And then you all responded with your performance evaluations, which I did a summary, which I provided to you as well. And so in the summary, what I did was I took all your ratings and I averaged them. And I included all the comments from your performance evaluations. So the purpose of the meeting tonight is to discuss Mike's performance. It will be on the agenda for the February 1st meeting to consider any kind of adjustment to his salary or benefits. I did want to bring to your attention that in his contract, it says that after conducting the annual review, the city council shall consider the results of the city manager's performance and apply guidelines of what these department directors received on their performance evaluations this year as part of the pay plan. So I did want to tell you that the department directors received anywhere from a 2 to a 3% increase, 2% being meets expectations, 2.5% above, and 3% exceeds. So that's kind of the baseline for the city manager's compensation adjustment based on your performance evaluation. So does anybody have any questions on that? So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Chris and to the City Council to have internal discussions regarding Mike's performance.
Thank you, Ann, for putting this all together, and also congratulations on your upcoming retirement.
Yay.
Good for you, sad for us, but we appreciate your service, and we're going to get as much out of you over the next 2 months as we can. But hopefully everyone has had a chance to review Mike's review and the department head comments. And as you know, we only have 2 employees that report directly to us. So this is a really important function, one that we did not do with our prior city manager for whatever reason, but I am glad that we're doing it now with Mike. And I think it's a really healthy exercise so that he knows where he stands with us and can pick up the themes in our comments and use those to guide him going forward. For me, I feel like this is probably the day where I will stop referring to him as our new city manager and just call him our city manager. And I know that after kind of that first year of letting him get in, start working on the culture internally with the city staff, which I think we can all agree he did very effectively. And then the second year dealing largely with COVID, but also while keeping city operations humming. And that was reflected a lot in our comments as well as the department head comments. But going forward, I saw a lot of similarities in really pushing forward with strategic planning and our mission visioning exercises and really starting to move the needle in terms of city operations. So I didn't see any surprises or anything that really stood out among the comments, but I wanted to give you guys all a chance to weigh in there if you had anything additional you wanted to add. No one?
I'll say one thing. I didn't have a ton to say being new, but I do really appreciate how reactive and expedient we are with things. Tonight we'll be talking about the moratorium, and we just talked about that. Just this week we addressed with the police department the parking issues. So I want to say, like, you know, reactiveness was very high, and you know, I think that's really great to see. I think the citizens, I know they really appreciate when an issue gets brought up that it gets resolved quickly. So I enjoyed that part of it.
I'll add that, Mike, I think you're doing an amazing job in the short term that we've got to know each other. I'm going to piggyback off what Chet said. You've always been very receptive, you know, allowed us to have meetings in short order. And I think you're doing way above par as far as I can see. I think it's masterful, quite frankly. And I think my eval speaks for itself. Thank you.
Any other comments? Go ahead, Fernando.
I have to piggyback on what Jansen and Stokes have said. When Mike came on board, obviously it was like a breath of fresh air. And everyone that I have talked to from police department, the directors, and some of the employees have said they're so happy to have him on board and how open he is to ideas and how he wants to help out the city in more ways. And Mike, you're doing a great job, and I'm happy to have you on board.
I will just briefly say thank you, Mike, for everything you continue to do for the city. You've done a great job these 2 years. As everyone said, you're very accessible, great to work with. You definitely have addressed citizen concerns and worked with us as the city council, you know, really well. I would just have a question. I know that there were a lot of comments in the eval. So my question would be, because I think last year there were, you know, again, comments in the written portion. I guess it wasn't real clear to me if there were any of those comments that were going to be taken and like implemented or anything done with. And so is there any way that maybe that could be something that you would share with us that, you know, okay, this year, based on these comments, here are the things that I'm going to plan to do in the coming year?
Mike, do you want to speak to that?
I certainly will. Well, funny you should mention that, Councilor Golding. One of the things that I did over the last couple of days was to go through the evaluation and pull out certain elements and condense it down into some common themes that I will be sharing with the department directors at the executive leadership team meeting at the beginning of February. You know, it's ironic that when we do a director's performance evaluation, we always have goals and objectives for the upcoming year. And the department director is able to take those goals and directives and turn around to the rest of their staff and say, if the city manager is expecting me to work on these issues, then that means the department is expected to work on these issues. So I'm going to have the same conversation with the directors with regard to the themes that I picked up on related to this year's performance evaluation. So I'll just walk through 4 quick notes that I made to summarize the conversation that's going to take place in February. The first is that the majority of the organizational comments seem to align with some conversations we've been having internally related to priorities, goals, and initiatives for the organization moving forward. The second is that the vision and strategic plan are mentioned 5 separate times by different council members throughout the comments, therefore placing that as a very high priority. There's a common theme for more information and communication, two-way with our constituency. And the last one is the continued desire for the council to be collaborative, not just amongst themselves, but also with the public. So we're going to do some brainstorming to figure out what we think are some of the best ways to meet the objectives of those themes. And when we come back to you with the budget assumptions, as we've done the past 2 years, you may hear some additional information about things we're going to try and do differently going forward.
So could I do a quick follow-up? Do you mind? So something that I'm trying not to compare, but something that the previous manager was doing before he left was on a fairly regular basis, he was putting together some reports or summaries from the various departments in the city so that the citizens as well as the city council could see, you know, here. So it's kind of like what the police department does on a monthly basis, but it, you know, it allows there to be some visibility to what's going on in the other departments. And it's something that's available to the public as well as to the council. So I didn't know if that's something that you would be considering doing this year as well.
I'm going to wait until I have the conversation with the directors to feel what we think is the right way to move forward. With what you're referencing, some of that information is already put forth by the departments, such as the police department, already sending out their monthly reports. The other thing I don't want to do, though, is get too bogged down with the minutia of details. So I want to make sure that the information we put out is not just accurate, but also meaningful information that they're going to want to read, that they're going to be excited about reading. And after seeing it 3 or 4 times, say, you know, I'm just looking at the same thing over and over again. You want to make sure they're giving them information that's actually new information or updates as they would see fit. So I wouldn't say that it's off the table, but we'll see where the conversation goes with the directors.
Any other comments on the evaluation? So when we propose acceptance, we will also have the opportunity to give an increase in salary to Mike, and the department heads, as Ann mentioned, received a 2 to 3% increase. Mike's average performances were all in between the excellent and above average range. Does anybody have any thoughts or objections that would differ than a 3% increase? All right, well, that was easy. Please give it some thought if you have any different feelings. This will come up in our next council meeting, I believe, right? First meeting in February?
February 1st, yes.
Okay. So look forward to starting the year with Mike's evaluation every year going forward, hopefully for many years. Thanks, Mike.
I'd like to comment on that part. I have on my notes, and it's not for now, it's for at least another year. I would like to move Mike's evaluation until June or July, because 1 month is not enough time for new council members to evaluate the city manager, to at least give them a little bit of time. So I'd like to shift the time. Like I said, we still have another year and 11 months until the next election. So I'm in no hurry for that, which is why I didn't bring it up, but I would like to see a shift in the eval time.
I just want to bring to your attention, it is part of his contract. So if you decide to do that in the future, you would need to amend his contract.
Well known.
And if I could just make a quick comment, first of all, to the council members that have been here for the last 2 years, thank you for your support and the working partnership I've had with you over the last 24 months. For the new council members, thank you for being readily available to work with me and to work as a team going forward. And to all of the department directors, some of them are on this call, others are not. A big shout out and thank you to them, because my job would not be possible if it wasn't for the support that they give me at the top of each department that they oversee. So a big big round of applause goes to them for what they deal with on a daily basis within their individual departments and their ability to work as a team.
Thanks, Mike. Moving along.
Well, if we're done with that item, we will move into item number 2. Thank you, Ann. Item number 2 is the community visioning and mission statement development. I provided each of you not just a summary memo, but also a document from the Florida Institute of Government, along with the resumes of the individuals who would be helping us in the facilitation. This is really just a gut check. The meat of what we're going to be doing is really the facilitators working with the council. So before we move forward, I just wanted to make sure that there were no concerns that council had with using Florida Institute of Government or the two practitioners in particular that we would be dealing with. So if there are no objections from council, basically tomorrow morning, I will be contacting our point of contact, Jeff Hendry, and start looking at the calendar and putting a date out there to start working on phase one, which would be the creation of the vision statement and the revisit of the mission statement for the community and organization respectively. And if you like the work that Florida Institute of Government does on phase one, then we can consider continuing that use of them for phase two, which would be diving into the strategic plan, which I'm envisioning would be 2, possibly more sessions to go through that particular function. So with that, if any of you have questions related to the proposal that we see or the use of Florida Institute of Government, now would be the time to ask it. I think if you take a look at the document I provided, for those of you that are not familiar with Florida Institute of Government, I provided what their mission statement is. And for those who may be listening at home, the mission statement of the John Scott Daly Florida Institute of Government is to enhance the capacity of Florida governments to effectively serve their communities through education and training, technical assistance, and applied research and public service. The Institute adheres to a set of core values, including commitment, integrity, quality, learning, and balance. So Florida Institute of Government is a nonprofit. They are affiliated with the state university system. Their goal is specifically to work with governments in the state of Florida and help them achieve higher goals and move forward as organizations. It's for those reasons that I'm suggesting we use them for phase one. And if things work out well, potentially phase two. And I'm not seeing any blue hands raised on the side. Hopefully all the new council members know that feature of raising hands. But I'm not seeing any hands raised. I'll take that as a consensus to plow forward with FIG. And so you'll probably see some emails come out from Chris Wright over the next 24 hours asking you for availability on upcoming Saturdays. And we will move forward from there. Fantastic. That will take us into item number 3 for tonight, which is related to scrolling. There we go. Which is related to the ordinance development for micromobility devices, particularly e-scooters. We have a series of people on the call tonight. We have Chris Ambrosio, our city attorney. We also have Riley Jacob and the police chief from our police department. One of the things that we thought we would do tonight is walk you through a high-level overview of the substantive changes to the proposed ordinance. I believe there may be some additional information to be provided from the police department and Ms. Jacobs. We also have the city attorney here to answer any questions as well. But this was an item that was brought up at a previous council meeting. There was a request to defer it so that the council could better familiarize themselves with what was included in the document. I believe we sent out with the package a comparison of the old to the new, speaking in terms of sections. So you could see whether sections moved, were unchanged, or were edited in some form, or potentially even completely overhauled. So with that, I'll say, Chris Ambrosio, do you have any comments you want to make as the city attorney on this project?
Mike, are you on the micromobility devices or?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah. Okay.
I got sidetracked. Yeah, I'm sorry. Yes. Micromobility.
Yeah. So let me, you got a lot on your plate.
I got a lot on my plate. You know what? This is micromobility. I'm going to turn it over to the city attorney, Chris Ambrosio. Okay. And when we're done with micromobility, we'll be more than happy to talk about Chapter 5, animals. Yes. Chris, go ahead.
Absolutely. So first of all, I just wanted to add that it's a pleasure working with Mike, and I want to thank the mayor for allowing me to have my office closer to Mike. It's actually helped us be even more productive. It's great. So we're 3 feet away from each other and we get much more done that way. But thank you very much. So this is the micromobility devices topic. And as you know, the council adopted a temporary moratorium that's in place for at least for 12 months from the point of adoption or up until the time that's the council adopts a permanent ordinance. So we took some steps following council's direction, and I have some comments about the what's called the FIC or FIC ride contracts. And also I'd like to share with you some of the research and conferences and meetings that we've done that we've had so far. And then of course, the most important part is getting your feedback on the topics and items that were listed in your agenda item memorandum tonight, your briefing memorandum. So first, let me just knock off the contracts real quick. The FIC Ride contracts that were presented. So that's the Ride FIC LLC company. That's the supplier to the only known vendor that we have in town, Kurt DeWitt, which you all have heard from. And those agreements do not protect the city in any way. That there is a release and hold harmless agreement and assumption of risk agreement, which the renter or the rider would fill out and complete and accept. That's going to essentially protect Kurt's company, the vendor, and then also FIC Ride. It doesn't protect the city in any way. The agreement, which is called the rider agreement, that does not protect City of Jacksonville Beach in the way that we're going to operate this rental program. It would protect us if us as a municipality were entering into an agreement with the local vendor. So there are some cities that have e-scooter ride share type of programs, community-based, where the city actually generates revenue from having that program available in their municipality. And it is a city promoted business. There's a contractual relationship and a proprietary type relationship between the municipality and the local private vendor. We're not, of course, I have heard nothing like that from council. So we are not going to be in business with the vendor. So therefore the rider agreement does nothing to protect us because that relationship does not exist and won't exist. So those are the FIC Ride contracts. They don't provide us with any protections. The protections that would apply to us are going to be the standard Florida statutory immunity protection that we would have for any other persons that may be, using a bicycle or a skateboard or something like that in our town. So after the council adopted the temporary moratorium, I had a meeting with our police department, primarily Commander Evans, and Mr. Sharp also chipped in, and we spoke to the finance department, the clerk's office, and planning and development led by Heather Ireland, and Mike and I. So we wanted to take the step of hearing from our departments and having us all begin a collaborative effort as to how each one of those departments would like to see an ordinance in ways that may help that department, or I wanted to hear from those department staff members for their contribution to what they think that an ordinance should have for the city of Jacksonville Beach. We also had a meeting with Kurt DeWitt, again, the only known vendor that we have in town. So that was a very fruitful meeting for us. We learned a lot about what Kurt, in terms of the local vendor, what his capabilities are. And his capabilities are pretty broad. On his app, the software program allows him as the local vendor to have great control over every single unit, I should say every scooter or unit that he rents, the areas that it can be utilized, the speed control. He can require the users to complete certain documents on their app before they're allowed to use it. So, and from the last thing that we heard from, last information we got from Kurt was that they're going to be improving the app. So he has even more control, and that's supposedly coming in 2021. So I share that with you, knowing that we're not in business with any vendor. We're not in business with Kurt DeWitt, and we won't be in business with any other vendor that should come into our town. But apparently the software is very capable of lots of controls and limitations. And we should expect that if another vendor comes in, that they probably will have the same or similar software. I say that because we can craft an ordinance that allows us to have very broad regulatory powers, which you as the elected body for a municipality in Florida, you have broad powers in the way that you want this ordinance to be drafted. The city has very broad regulatory and police powers over its traffic, its use of roadways. And so you can keep that in mind as you contemplate how strict you'd like to see this ordinance. But we got a lot of great input from our department heads. And I'm gonna let Commander Evans speak to his safety concerns. He can also speak to the geographical locations and limitations for the red zones, the slow zones, the go zones. We covered all of that with Kurt. So I felt comfortable leaving the meeting with Kurt that whatever we feel like we want to have in our ordinance, a vendor is going to be able to be a successful vendor, carry on their business, and comply with our ordinance. Okay, so Chief, do you or Commander Evans want to jump in here?
Chris, I'm kind of at a disadvantage. Commander Evans is at the CRA right now. He's getting ready to speak on that one, so maybe you can come back to us. Sure. I do not have anything to add other than what Commander Evans.
Okay, I'll add a little bit that Commander Evans shared with the group in several meetings already. He has a high concern for operation of the e-scooters going west of 3rd Street. And in Commander Evans' comments in our several meetings, he doesn't want them to go any further than the east sidewalk of 3rd Street. He has experience, as you all know, he's had far too much experience with tragic accidents and incidents of cyclists, pedestrians, skateboarders, cars on 3rd Street, and particularly people crossing from east to west, west to east across 3rd. So he made that point very strong. He'd like to see that as the western border of the zone of operation. From what we gather from Kurt, again, he's the only vendor is available to us to speak to. He intends on having his operations from our north border up to Neptune Beach. And if it was up to him, he would go clear up through Atlantic Beach, but those aren't our jurisdictions. But he intends on going up to our northern border and then as far south as our south border is. And he said, quite frankly, he intends on going through into Ponte Vedra Beach in St. Johns County. So in terms of north and south, again, we have the ability of restricting the geographical location of where these rented vehicles or scooters could be operated. We also have the ability to designate red zones, so the no zone, no ride zone, slow zones, and go zones. The app enables the vendor to program the scooters so that if, for example, the GPS system indicates that the scooter is on a sidewalk, that the scooter will automatically slow down to a particular mile per hour that the vendor can set that at. So if the council should allow the scooters to operate on sidewalks and you'd like for their speed limit to be reduced to 7 miles per hour, well, he can program that. So a vendor can control that and program that. And then I'd be glad to answer your questions, but it's really important for us to walk through some of the items that are on the memo and get council's feedback on those. So Mike and I, those are 7 categories that are some of the primary categories that we'd have to consider in drafting an ordinance. Just so you know, we also have researched maybe a dozen or more other cities. We have information from clerks' offices around the state with respect to some of the fees and charges that they apply to their e-scooter programs. And I just would like to get some feedback from council to get some direction on drafting, although I've already started, but we'll keep it going. So I'd be glad to hear from any of my council about any of those topics in the agenda memo.
Looking for hands to be raised. Fernando.
Yes, on number 7, when we look into this even more, how many businesses are we allowed, if any business want to come in, are we going to have a max capacity of like only 2-3 businesses? Are they going to be limited to just the central business district, or are they going to be able to open up a small business right by, let's say, 17th Avenue North and 3rd Street? Have you guys thought about that? I mean, obviously, people that want to start a business are going to look for ways of trying to get around certain areas.
Yep, we have looked into it, and it appears that the most profitable business plan, again, talking to Kurt and then doing some research, it appears that the most profitable business plan for a vendor is going to be having scooters available at a central office where maybe they're in one of the strip malls, for example, right downtown, and then also to have their scooters at various locations positioned around whatever district that is they can operate in. So for example, if it was up to Kurt, you know, his option would be, his choice would be, he has a central office where he has some scooters, and then he has 9 different locations throughout the downtown area. For example, having 10 to 15 scooters at Wits and maybe 20 to 25 at every beachfront hotel. So that would be for council to decide in terms of the number of locations that a vendor is allowed to have, the number of scooters allowed to operate in our city. You can put a cap on the number of operators in the city. So you do have a lot of control in that regard. From what I've seen from other cities, they do put caps on the overall number of available scooters for rental. They have a cap on the locations and on the number of vendors. So that's, Fernando, you have a lot of leeway there to work with. By the way, on number 7, the rebalancing and designated parking corrals, that concept is, the concept of rebalancing is say, for example, if a vendor has 200 total scooters in our city and they have 6 or 7 locations, if that vendor by their app will be messaged where the scooters are throughout the city. At any time, he may want to rebalance, meaning put more scooters in a particular location. So shift 10 from one location over to a location that seems to be depleted of scooters. You know, an oceanfront hotel that he'd like to have 25 scooters at may be so rented out that he sees on a Sunday morning there's only 2 left. Well, he'll rebalance and redistribute scooters around town. The designated parking corrals is a concept that I've seen in my research, and I like that term because I can visualize a designated parking corral where at each location the scooter must be parked. If it's going to be stationary and not being used, then it must be contained within a particular corral. That way we can control scooters being left all over sidewalks or at storefronts, in front of hotels and scattered all about, you know, of course, causing potentially a safety hazard for the public and then also a headache for our police department.
And also on the designated area, so obviously people want to rent them out, go get ice cream, go to the bar, the restaurant, or go to the boutique shops. Are we going to have designated spots where they could leave those scooters, obviously out of the sidewalk, out of the way?
Right. I haven't contemplated that yet because I mean, I would, you know, my thought was that would leave us with dozens of designated parking corrals where those aren't designated e-scooter locations where you can, of course, rent or return. But instead of having designated parking corrals throughout the city at those various locations, I was thinking that we would have to apply some sort of fine or, you know, citation-based system if we find that bikes or scooters are being left unattended for a long period of time on the public rights of way or sidewalks. I can't think of another way to do that because, you know, I mean, unless the council really wanted us to go forward with putting designated parking corrals for e-scooters at all the potential places that our residents and guests may patronize, that's going to leave us with a lot of designated parking corrals, and the business owners may not go for that. You know, you may have a particular bar or two that may not want a designated parking corral. That may be an area where, for example, their customers go out to smoke, for example. So we could be confronted with a lot of problems there, but I think we need to regulate abandoned or long-term left scooters on rights of way and enforce that against the vendor. Because again, you know, part of the benefit of vendors having such a good app and strong GPS system with abundance of information, that vendor knows how long a scooter has been sitting stationary, how long that the power has been off, how long or how much battery life that scooter even has, meaning the vendor knows that, you know, based on the amount of power or battery life, that the scooter is not going to get past the next 2 blocks. So that vendor knows he needs to go get that scooter off the street. So I wouldn't suggest that we have parking corrals throughout the city, but we have other enforcement mechanisms that put the responsibility on the vendor to make sure they're kept out of our right of way and our sidewalks.
Councilor Jansen, followed by Councilor Stokes.
Yeah, so just to kind of piggyback on what you were already talking about, I'm all about a rebalancing system, but and I also agree that I don't know what that magic number is. I think we do have to have enough, because the problems I have seen in other cities that have had scooters, most of them have been college towns. So I don't know that we would have it to the level or degree like Gainesville or one of them have it, or Tallahassee. But I think there should be adequate number of parking spaces or parking locations, I should say, so that we don't end up with the abandonment of scooters all over our city or even of our downtown districts, wherever we set those borders at. And I don't know what that number is, but I wouldn't like this. I'd rather see more, but smaller, like that holds, I don't know what the number would be, 8 scooters instead of, 25 in one location. I'd rather have a lot more smaller ones instead of 5 big ones. And people are kind of handcuffed to having to walk 6 blocks once they drop their scooter off or what have you, because they may get lazy on us and just drop them off. Going back to number 4, I know you mentioned it before. We've talked about it before in other briefings about the bond. I'm a big fan of that. I think that kind of puts them on the hook of making sure that they stay up to par with their business and they're not dropping the ball. And I really like at the end of number 4, where you talk about the city manager to render decisions, limited vendors' privileges to operate in the city should they violate city code or permit requirements. I think that's a very valuable statement. And I'm good with the appeal process subsequent to that as well, so that we can set that up. I really like that. One other question I guess I have, and I don't know if this falls into us getting involved in their business or not, but when you look at the software that DeWitt's using, is that something that we could say, well, if you're going to come in here and operate a business in our city, you have to use that software? Because it appears that you really like it. I've seen it just superficially. I don't know all it can do. Instead of somebody else coming in here and starting their business and using a less than adequate software and coming to us and say, well, my software doesn't do that, so I'm not going to worry about it.
Right. We should not get in the business of controlling what software programs a vendor or a contractor or a business uses. But what we can do is craft the ordinance so that those incoming vendors are going to have to find a software program that enables them to comply with our ordinance in order to operate their business in our jurisdiction. But no, council member, I don't think we should, limit a potential vendor who might do business here to a particular software program. There's 3 or 4 that are competitive, 3 or 4 software programs apparently that are very competitive with each other. So I would venture to say that they're probably so closely matched in what services they provide. I don't think that'll be an issue. But the goal is that the vendors comply with our ordinance. and they need to make their business plan compliant with what you want. But our council wants.
Then it would probably be a priority, at least of mine, to make sure that we're meeting those qualifications of a software that, you know, maintains GPS of the locations and where they're being dumped off at, and the, I don't know, the $20 liability fee if you do drop it off, you know, those type things. Those would be important too.
Yeah.
And Councilor Jansen, just to add on a little bit to that, I think there's an opportunity here for the city to set the bar and require all the businesses to meet the standard that the council sets. You even mentioned, I think, the $20 fee, which is what we heard Mr. DeWitt charges for people who abandon their e-scooter in the right way. Just because he charges $20 to the user doesn't mean that that's what we need to adopt as the penalty if an e-scooter is found abandoned on the sidewalk or in the public right of way. We can make it a $50 fee to reclaim the property. And in turn, Mr. DeWitt may go back and change his business model to where instead of a $20 penalty, it's a $50 penalty. And that may achieve a higher rate of compliance of the e-scooters making their way back into the appropriate corral or pen before they're done with its use. Is
that one of the decision-making processes that you would have under number 4 that I referred to? Would that fall under, or would that be something that we would have to address as a council?
That's something that we would propose to you based on what we're hearing for feedback tonight.
I guess I meant going forward, like let's say a year and a half down the road.
A year and a half down the road, obviously all of the business models could be changed by then. We could end up having conversations and making changes to whatever ordinance is put in place. We could end up with additional requirements. We could end up with fewer requirements. We could end up with changes in the financial accountability associated with these types of businesses. The one thing I keep trying to stress with any ordinance that we bring in front of council is that the ordinance are not carved in stone for a minimum period of time. They should be considered fluid. And if at some point in time council deems an ordinance needs to be changed, we bring the ordinance back, we revisit it. Clearly, e-scooters were not on the horizon several years ago, and it's something that now a lot of communities are dealing with around the entire country. We may find that in 3 years' time, e-scooters aren't the latest thing, but there's a new form of technology. Perhaps they're automated e-scooters where you don't even drive it, it drives itself and it's got 4 wheels, I don't know. But we may end up bringing it back at a later point in time just to make updates to what's happening with technology. It's changing faster than I think we can contemplate at this point.
One other question I had is a reference to this chart on page, I guess, just under 3 of 3. Then the chart, I guess it's an appendix, if you will. Was that research done by you, Chris?
This was research. I offered those cities to the city clerk, our city clerk, and asked them to research at least those cities for now in order to prepare for the briefing. So ultimately that was done by the city clerk with those cities provided by me.
Was St. Augustine, was theirs brought in front of council and they just decided not to have scooters? Do you know?
Yeah, I believe it was a ban on those types of devices in their city. As you know, the way that the city of St. Augustine is situated, and I did speak to their city attorney quite a while back when this first started coming up, and I got a copy of their ordinance and a description of what happened there. But if I recall right, that these types of devices were going to be banned by the city. They do have some devices. I think they may have like segways where you can be toured in certain locations of the city by a tour guide. But my understanding is that they wanted to ban these in the city. And I could see it because there's going to be some areas where the pedestrian traffic is so high in the city of St. Augustine, these can become so dangerous. I get it. And by law, the current law on the books is that a municipality can absolutely ban these. So it's still legally permissible to ban it entirely.
Thank you.
Councilor Stokes.
Yep.
Sorry. My question for Chris is on 6, when we talk about maximum number of vendors, what's our like lowest threshold? Is it 2? I mean, I don't think we could just have one vendor because obviously Kurt has been good to work with so far, but you know, it's the fear down the road is, you know, craft the ordinance. It's great with Kurt's business, and then, you know, Lime, Bird, somebody else tries to kind of weasel their way in. What's kind of the low threshold there? And then I'll follow up.
Again, that's a policy decision for all of you to make as a majority. But, you know, we would want to take into consideration, and I'm so glad that you started with number 6, Mr. Stokes, because that's the one that is most difficult for me to get a grasp on, because that really is for the 7-member body to grab a hold of. How many devices, rental devices, do you want or see operating in your city in a particular geographical region? The answer is that is a number for you guys to decide, for the council to decide. If I would say start with the number of devices, the maximum number of devices, and then from there, think backwards to how many vendors would you want to have operating in your city? And what is a fair number of devices to allow one vendor to have? So for example, and I'll share this with you, Mr. DeWitt. By the way, Mr. DeWitt thanks all of you for allowing him to even participate in the limited way that he has and to come speak to you. He's very concerned about public safety, so he thanks you very much. But you know, Mr. DeWitt's business model, at this point, he shared an idea, a concept of 100 to 125 scooters. I don't know if that is going to last very long, because as they appear to become very profitable, I don't know why he'd limit himself there. But for our jurisdiction and for the limited geographical area that you would allow them to operate, if you could picture on a given day the maximum number of scooters that you want to have out there and available for rental, think of that number. And you know, you may think in the lines of what we've experienced so far with one vendor and the number of scooters that he has, and he hasn't reached 125 yet. But given that, you know, we on our summers and special events, Florida Georgia weekends, things like that, I mean, we're going to have potentially hundreds and hundreds of scooters going around our city on any of those given weekends. You can put a cap on that. You can put a limitation on it. There's going to be some enforcement difficulties, meaning, for example, if the council decides to have 3 vendors max and 500 scooters max operating in our city, well, it's going to be difficult for us to know whether vendor B has gone from her 200 scooters to 220 scooters. It's going to be so difficult for us to know that. We have to think of a way to monitor and get reporting from a vendor, and we're going to have to have reliance on the vendors to be operating honestly and also give us honest information when we ask them for the number of scooters that they're operating. But ultimately, Mr. Stokes, the council is to decide the number of vendors and the cap on the number of scooters. A lot of discretion. You have a lot of discretion in this.
So if we capped it at 100, we could cap it at 2 vendors, because we can't cap it at 1, because that's a legal issue. So we could say you got 102 vendors and we're done, and just to further the combo.
You could do that. You could do that. Yep.
And then just, you know, to go to look at the chart, I liked Miami, Tampa, and Austin's, you know, ways of operations. And I think if you do that, Miami and Austin provide the best way to kind of know how many scooters, because they're paying for a device. And obviously you'll have to audit, because they might try to go from 200 to 205 and not pay for those extra 5. But at least when you have you're charging per unit, and, you know, Austin's charging a trip fee, so then you know the usage of the units as well. So I liked those systems. Really, I liked Austin and Miami Beach, probably the most too of those all the systems.
Yeah. Yeah, that's another policy decision for a council to make, which is in which way and what method do you want to utilize to charge fees to an operator.
Councilor Dumont.
Thank you. I was just thinking about what Chet was saying. Two isn't enough because if they can then raise their prices together and you don't have an option for another competitor to enter the market. So putting a cap on the number of operators is problematic because of the access to competition. You want to make sure that there's competition to keep the prices low and the service is good. Conversely, if you only have 100 scooters and use who gets what percentage of those 100 scooters? Does one get 50 and then the other 50 have to be divided between 5 that only get 10 each? That's not going to be a sustainable business model for those other companies. So I think, I'm not saying we shouldn't have a cap. I think we just have to be very careful and cognizant of what caps can do down the road to businesses trying to enter the marketplace, as well as those who are in the marketplace being able to become mini monopolies and take advantage of our residents and our visitors.
Absolutely. And that coincides with what Councilmember Jansen said, which is that, in his opinion, he'd prefer not to see large numbers at any of the scooters at any one given location, for example, 20 to 30 of them, but maybe 8 to 10. If we had 4 vendors capped at 80 each, well, boy, that sure seems generous to me. That gives them an opportunity to have a lot of scooters at a lot of different locations and still keep the number of any one particular location, keep it down. Keep in mind that, these vendors are likely going to have to enter into agreements with the private property owners so that, for example, one of the hotels, they're likely not going to be entering into an agreement with multiple vendors. So if we do have a vendor, Mr. DeWitt has a jump on the competition. He can get into agreements, obviously, with private owners now before any of his competition arrives. But ultimately, those hotels, they're not going to get into multiple agreements with, competitors. The competitors wouldn't do that. But, something that the council needs would want to look at is how many different locations around town are we going to allow scooters to be stationed at? Because if you do, for example, allow 3 vendors in the city, just again, as Mr. DeWitt has contracts with 6 private property owners, well, when the second vendor comes in, they're going to be quickly looking for 6 other spots that Kurt DeWitt's company is not at. And, I could see that quickly the city would have many different locations. So we could put a cap on the number of locations that scooters are allowed to be at for any one particular vendor. So you can help control and regulate the number of locations a little bit as well. But I do agree. I agree the competition is necessary for better services, for better prices for users and guests and residents. And but I do think that there needs to be a control on it. There needs to be a cap on the number of scooters we allow, a cap on the number of vendors, and a cap on the number of locations they're allowed to operate at. And then most certainly a geographical limitation.
Councilor Golden.
Thank you, Chris, for all this information. This is really, really good. So in line with what we've been talking about, do we have, that table that you did was really good as far as like giving us information about the fees that some cities are charging. Would it be possible to get more information about the caps that other cities are placing? I mean, it would give us a better idea, like how many, what are the caps that Miami Beach has or Austin or whatever? I mean, or if there's any cities that are a similar size to ours, I don't know. But I mean, if we could get if we could get some of that information, it might help us come up with some numbers that we think we might want to start with.
Sure. I have all of the ordinances from all of those cities that are listed there, and we can make a chart, a similar chart that shows the number of vendors and scooters, that type of information, and then I can distribute it via email to the council. And then at another public meeting, you could discuss that with all, we could all discuss it if you'd like.
And then another question I had, you know, it sounds like the apps are really great, or, you know, getting a lot of functionality. And I know one of the big concerns that you had expressed at the city council meeting was some of the safety issues, like with people, you know, more than one person riding a scooter, or, you know, not wearing helmets and that sort of thing. And I haven't heard anything about the helmets. So is that something that at the location where they would rent the scooters, they would be able to get a helmet or there as well? And then also, as far as like multiple people riding the scooters, do the apps have the capability to detect that, you know, that, I mean, because I know they have weight limits. It said like 220-pound weight limit or something like that, right? But is there some way that the apps can actually identify that there may be some violation going on with the multiple riders?
Right. So far from what I've found out is that no, the app would not be able to indicate or be able to receive information about how many riders are on there. But for getting information to the rider, the app, again, the vendor can program, along with its supplier, can program the app to require the user to go through pages of information or screens of information or slides of information that instructs or advises or recommends certain bits of information. For example, the vendor could have on the very first page, when the person pulls up the app and elects to rent the scooter, the first warning could, for example, be wearing helmets while operating the scooter is strongly suggested. And if you do not have a helmet, then a helmet is available at our main station, or press this button and a helmet will be brought to you. Again, this is information that we've learned so far. And Mr. DeWitt backed that up, saying the software could provide him with that information, and he can bring helmets to someone. They can regulate to some limited extent the users, and they're looking at potentially getting driver's license information so that their age can be confirmed, so that no people under the age of 18 are allowed to use them. For example, Mr. DeWitt wants to have 18 or older limitation for his users. And so there's no way for the app to truly know the age of the person that gets on that scooter and goes. There's no way for the app to know if there's two people that weigh 125 pounds each on that scooter. But that kind of bleeds into now our police regulatory requirements, so that if our ordinance says, you know, two people may not ride it at one time, or anyone under the age of 18 may not ride a scooter, rent or ride a scooter, then, you know, our police force is going to have to give that a thought. And, you know, as Commander Evans said, it's going to be hard for him to tell if someone's 17 or 18, but he sure knows when someone's 12. And he'll take care of it. You know, him and his officers take care of that at that time. But no, the app has some limitations, obviously, but it does have some capabilities. But it's a very user-oriented app, meaning that the vendor can program the app to send certain information and require the user to acknowledge and accept, and get to the next page, acknowledge and accept. So at least the information has been provided to that user. Safe operation. The geographic mapping needs to be provided so that those users know where the go, slow, and no zones are. The limitations on weight, age, only one user at a time. It's going to be that sort of program where it's going to be user-based. User will be checking off those pages. And then if someone violates those and it gets into some of the violations of our ordinance, then our law enforcement is going to have to enforce our ordinance against them and against the vendor in some circumstances.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Councilor Dumont.
with the caps and scooters and vendors and all that, it's going to be moot unless we know what the square footage is where the scooters can operate. So we'd need the square footage of where they can be operating. You know, it could be, is it all of Miami or is it in 2 blocks of Miami? Right. That kind of a thing. So I just need that kind of a variable included.
Absolutely. And that is actually a good starting point, is the geographical location where council would authorize these to be utilized. That's an important determination that council has to make in part of its draft in our preparation of the ordinance. What is the region that you will allow these to be operated?
Councilor Stokes.
I personally, I unmuted, yes. I like the suggestion from Commander Evans that we limit them east of 3rd for the public rentals. I feel like we should use the same standard as where we permit bikes for the geographical areas of use, obviously not on the boardwalk. I don't think we really want these things running on the sidewalks. I worry about pedestrian traffic on the sidewalks. We don't usually permit biking on the sidewalks. So I worry about that for the same reason, even with the speed control. But if they're confined to like bike lanes, those kind of things, I don't feel like these devices would interfere with bike traffic in bike lanes. Lower my hand.
Thank you. And Councilor Jansen.
I'm good with what Mark was suggesting to a certain extent. I think the problem we might run into with the restricting it to just the east side of 3rd Street is what starts happening if we have parking spots for the scooters on 3rd Street somewhere at strategic locations, like for an example, right there where Mellow Mushroom and Salt Life is. I can see scooter riders wanting to get across the street to go over to the pizza place or the sushi place north, or even pick your poison, anything that's on the west side of 3rd Street. I would almost be inclined to say I'd rather have regulation in place and let it be limited to 4th Street or the businesses on 3rd Street than people trying to do a workaround and to get to those businesses, unless we take a look at where the high volume is and make sure that there's some parking so that when they decide they want to cross 3rd Street, it's done safely, either on foot and they can leave their scooter really close by. Just food for thought, because I think that you're going to see people wanting to get on the other side of 3rd Street for certain businesses.
By the way, I forgot to mention that the attorneys for Atlantic Beach and Neptune Beach asked me to share with the council that their boards did, their councils did approve a moratorium, and that they'll be looking at it further as well. But there's no guarantees that they're going to allow the operation in their cities at this point.
Councilor Golding.
To follow up on what Chet and Dan both said, I agree with Chet, not on the boardwalk, don't want them on the sidewalk, and east of 3rd Street. I think we start out with east of 3rd Street. If somebody wants to go across 3rd Street, then they can leave it, somewhere on the east side of 3rd, and hopefully use one of our safe pedestrian crosswalks to get across the street to one of the businesses on the west side. And we start out with that. And then if we see that there's, a need to make any changes, then we could do that.
Councilor Stokes.
I think that's a great thought to start. Chris, with the geofencing, could we just so we can kind of bridge both of our thoughts with Councilmember Jansen, could we have specific crosswalks that they could use in the geofencing? Like if we said you can only cross at Beach Boulevard because it's very well lit, is that possible in the geofencing just for down the road if we're to enable going across Third? I like the idea right now of limiting it at Third, but if we are to expand it further down the road, would that be a possibility?
Yeah, so far I haven't heard that we can do that to set that at a particular, or require them to set that at a particular intersection. That I don't recall that being an option for a particular intersection.
That's something we'd have to follow up with the vendors with regards to the technology. Clearly, geofencing is capable. The question is how much can you focus the range station, so to speak. So for instance, when we were talking with Mr. DeWitt, one of his concerns with setting the boundary on the east side of 3rd Street is that it's going to be plus or minus some distance. It's not going to be a defined line right on the back of the sidewalk. And the units will start to decelerate as you approach that zone. And he obviously had a concern of, having a person start to go across A1A and then have the scooter lock up. So he'd want to make sure that the boundary is set far enough east that it never gets to the point of someone getting 5 or 10 feet out into a lane before the scooter just locks out. But clearly, I think Councilor Stokes, I understand what you're saying. If there are very specific or strategic locations that we want to allow people to be able to cross the street, can we geofence those intersections from an allowance perspective and say, sure, you can cross A1A, but you can only do it at the following location. And by the way, those happen to be locations that all have traffic signals with signalized crosswalks. That's certainly something that we can take a look at down the road. I think the concern right now is people trying to go across roughshod in different locations. But clearly, as we think about an urban trail system and starting to use alternative modes of transportation in other areas of the city, certainly there are going to be areas we want people to cross A1A on bikes and as pedestrians. And there's a possibility that that would expand to other forms of mobility as well.
That's a great follow-up. And I really like the point you just made about, making sure that it doesn't cut off on somebody when they get onto 3rd Street. That would be an absolute catastrophe. So I'm glad you brought up that point so we can make sure that that doesn't happen.
Councilor Dumont.
Thanks. So before you guys were saying that, you could slow it down on a sidewalk, you can make it not do things, and you just said that it's not that precise. Which one is it? Because that really matters as to how these things will be written.
Well,
if it's 3 or 4 feet off or 5 feet off, that's a sidewalk.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I mean, what we've learned so far is that the software allows for the bike to automatically be, the mile per hour to be reduced, but gradually. And it can detect, apparently, when it's on, based on the way it's been geomapped, it can detect when it's on a road that's permissible or when it's crossed over into a sidewalk or a zone where it has to go slower or not operate at all. But there is, instead of a sudden stop, there's always a gradual slow to either the slower speed or into a no speed, into 0. But it's gradual.
And we're talking about this geocoding that it's very precise, and it's not. Anybody who's used a run app has seen that if you're running on the beach, you're running in the ocean. I've run through people's houses.
Yeah.
And that part's kind of concerning. So when we are working on this ordinance, we really have to be very specific about, so the boardwalk's kind of easy. When I run on the boardwalk, I've usually been on the boardwalk. Other than that, to say that you can't ride on sidewalks, I don't think you can actually have the scooter say, oh, I'm on a sidewalk, let's slow down now, when a foot to the left, it would be in a bike lane. So we need to be very specific and not rely on the technology, which is very ironic with me stating not to rely on the technology.
Yeah, the precision of the geofencing, geomapping, I think you're right, is questionable if it could be that precise. That's why the ordinance needs to be drafted in a certain way where if the council wants to prohibit their use on sidewalks, that's in the ordinance, and that the vendor makes that known on the user app so that users are alerted to that and warned that they cannot by law operate on City of Jacksonville Beach sidewalks. And, you know, at some point, the vendors are going to have to program their user software to match what our code calls for. And if it's no operation on a sidewalk, then they're going to have to make a user check that box before they can proceed with the rental. And one thing that Commander Evans mentioned was that, Ms. Dumont, was that, you know, he's concerned about even someone approaching in a slower mode towards Third. He's very cautious. You know, he's seen the most tragic events. He made that point known. He's seen the most tragic events and accidents on 3rd Street. And he's just even concerned about people, you know, scooter users who are approaching, going west, heading towards 3rd in a slow speed. I said, I don't even want them near 3rd Street because he's seen too many deaths, of course, so.
And Chris, correct me if I'm wrong, but when we were talking to Mr. DeWitt, one of the things he indicated was, while the geofencing is not exact, you may have situations where someone is driving on the street at, say, 15 miles an hour on the e-scooter, and then they try to jump up on a sidewalk. And what they might find is the scooter does a slowdown from 15 to 5 and tries to cut out at a certain point in time based on which side of the sidewalk they're on. And that would become very frustrating to people to use the device in that manner of traveling at 5 miles an hour on a sidewalk when they know they can do 15 if they're in the street. Mm-hmm. So it's not exact, but there would certainly be some annoyances with trying to use the e-scooters on the border of an area that is geofenced versus using it completely inside of an area that's geofenced.
Yeah. And then, you know, keep in mind that in order to place these scooters at these various corrals, they're going to have to come off of our city streets and go on to private property and perhaps cross public right-of-way and or sidewalks, up driveways. For example, I'm picturing the hotels, and get into parking lots and then up into the corral, where the corral is not going to be on public property, of course. The corral is going to be on that private property, So there's going to be some times when the user is going to have to push and just move it along by pushing it, but not by operating it or driving it. And then they can only begin operating it when they're on the road. And then on some occasions, it's going to cease operation when they get off the road to go to these various corrals. So there's a lot to consider in terms of the geofencing and where they're going to be operable and where they're not going to be operable.
Councilor Stokes?
All right, so the last one we really haven't hit is the times of use. And if there is a concern about using these devices late in the evening, you know, time of day during special events, is it possible to have an adjusted either geo mapping or adjusted speed based on time? So say after 11 p.m. you can't go west of 2nd, or after 11 p.m. they all go down from 15 to 10 miles per hour. Is that a possibility, or is it a strict, you know, after, you know, it's a, I don't know how to explain it. It's just kind of what I'm thinking on.
Yeah, I don't recall Kurt sharing that sort of level of precision in terms of the hours and times of use. But he did mention that, you know, come say, for example, 11 p.m., he can make all of the devices inoperable. But I don't recall us talking about being able to reduce, you know, on a given hour, the capability, its maximum speed capability, for example. I think that it might get very confusing for users if we change the geographical locations by hour, you know. So you may have a very innocent user using it at 9 p.m. and they think that they're following the law, they're doing the right thing, and then suddenly at 9:59 to 10 o'clock, everything changed on them. They're still trying to follow the law, but suddenly something changed, you know, and that may cause some problems, maybe some hazards or dangers. But he can certainly program it so that the machines are inoperable at any time. In fact, I think he even has the capability of pushing the app and making one just inoperable altogether. So he has a lot of control. Times of use, there were some discussions of times of use with Mr. DeWitt. You know, again, from his perspective as the only vendor in town, he had some concepts and ideas about people wanting to ride them to dinner, have dinner at restaurants, and then be able to at least ride them back. So, you know, that he looks at hours like 10 p.m. or 11 p.m. So up in that higher range of hours at night. These were just concepts that he was looking at. But again, council is free to decide on its own what hours of operation they would be available.
Councilor Dumont.
Yeah, so we just said going out to dinner, and earlier in this conversation, we were talking about coming up with a time. What is it? Coming up with a time that designates when a scooter is abandoned. So how long a scooter can sit on a sidewalk or wherever it is. So do you go out for dinner or go out shopping and then go to another shop? And so we'd need to regulate the time frame that the scooter's just, I guess, sitting there without a new user coming by. So the operator, the vendor, come by and pick up the scooter while the people are inside having their, the extra glass of wine that they probably shouldn't have had, which knocked the time that they now lose the scooter when they go out of the restaurant. The operator's already picked up the scooter and, you know, put it back in the bin. And now you have people without any scooters available. So what is that time frame, and how do you let people know that, you know, you can't leave it sitting there for an hour, because then we're going to come and pick it up again?
Right. Yeah, that's another one of those difficult, weird calls on this very new issue we have. Mr. DeWitt gave an example of a scooter that was rented for quite a long time. The user, again, on his app, he noticed that that scooter had been stationary for 30 minutes or even a little bit more than 30 minutes. He sent a message through the app to the user. You realize that your scooter has been stationary in front of, 123 First Street for 33 minutes. Are you done using this scooter, or do you intend on bringing it back? And then the user text messaged or messaged him back on the app, no, I'm done using it. And, so he gets a message from Kurt, well, I'm going to come pick it up and charge you $20. Great, come pick it up and charge me $20. It's there's a lot of variables and situations that it's going to, we'll do our best to craft the ordinance to try to cover all of these. But as Mike said, this thing's definitely not going to be in cement. I mean, this is going to be a piece of Play-Doh ordinance that we're working with. And it's going to take some time for us to learn everything and reshape it, come back and revisit it in a year or so. But
and Council, yes. Want to address your question about parking at establishments where you may be for a period of time. One of the things we've looked at, and with regards to the, I think it's number 7 with the reallocation of the units, is that the vendors may end up striking agreements with a multitude of private property owners, whereby someone going to the establishment would put the scooter in the appropriate location on the property to show that it's now off of the right of way, it's on private property. They're still tracking it by GPS, but they know that when people go to that establishment, they usually take anywhere from 1 to 2 hours before they reactivate the unit. So a great example would be a restaurant. If someone were going out to eat, when they pull up to the restaurant, the expectation might be that the vendor has the equivalent of a corral on the private property that can hold somewhere in the neighborhood of 20 to 30 scooters. And that this is where people would place the scooter while they go inside to enjoy a dinner of potentially an hour or longer. And when they come back out, there would in theory be a handful of scooters still in that pen, particularly theirs, and then they would take it and continue on their merry way. The intention of some of the things we're talking about is to keep the devices from being abandoned in the public right of way, having them left on the street or having them left on the sidewalk. So I think that the business community, and Mr. DeWitt in particular, is already starting to think of ways that the device can be stored on a private property through a predetermined agreement, and that the individual can come back out after a certain time and take their unit or potentially a different unit and re-rent it and go to a new location.
Yeah, I'm really thinking about the downtown area where we have businesses that don't have any property. It would be parked on, like people park their scooters on the sidewalk. Would you park your e-scooter on the sidewalk?
And that would pose an issue. You're absolutely correct.
And now do we also ticket or fine the people who park their scooters on the sidewalk in front of a building? Because they already do that. They're just motorized and not electronic.
Yeah, it's a challenge. We need to think all that through.
Mayor Hoffman?
Thank you. That was, I mean, exactly where my head was. You know, I've done the Limes. I've done like city bikes in New York where you take it out of the rack for, I think it's like 20 minutes, and then you have to go put it back in and check it in at another, but they have them everywhere. So it works out. And then the Limes, you just leave them and you check out and it stops charging you. So I feel like we're kind of mixing models, because if you're going to rent a scooter for a couple hours, then this doesn't really work, because there wouldn't really be that incentive to go find, like City Bike, to go find the check-in, because you have to put your bike back in to stop the clock on it. But if they had enough corrals, and this is where Mr. DeWitt will definitely have an advantage, if you have enough corrals, even if you're not going to restaurant A, but it's across the street from Hotel B, then you can just go park it over there. But I still think that there's some more of the business model that we have to take into account, because this isn't going to be the same as what most of the other scooters we're seeing in other communities are. The other, I'm also not sure, I can see why we want to do apples to apples on how many scooters are in each of the example towns, but that seems like a lot of work that I don't really know if that's going to tell us anything, because we won't necessarily know if that works for them or not, or what the nature of those streets and communities are. Austin is a huge college town, for one, with a ton, you know, huge nightlife and restaurant and bar business. So I don't necessarily know that that's gonna provide value. And then the other item, we've talked about east-west, and I completely agree with keeping it east of 3rd, especially as we start out. But we haven't talked north-south, and I think north to the city boundary works great, because we do have hotels all the way up there. But south, once you get south of Huguenot Park, you're not 1st, 2nd, 3rd Street anymore. And it's distinctly more residential there. So I don't know if we would want to go south to the county line at that point, since it's not quite the grid system as much as it is up in the northern part of town. So just my 2 cents.
And there's another concept that Mr. DeWitt shared, which is that, you know, there's potentially a month-long or greater rental process. So we may see people, snowbirds, for example, come in, or guests that come in for months at a time, or people that come into their units on their condos, oceanfront, and they rent bikes and surfboards and things from him for an entire summer. Well, they may very well make an arrangement with him as well to rent scooters once they're available for the entire, you know, winter or entire summer. So that's a separate category. Those are other, you know, I mean, hopefully we can craft the ordinance so that they fall right in line with every other guideline and regulation that we have. But that's just another concept that I wanted to share with you that we haven't discussed yet. Long-term rental.
Councilor Stokes?
I think of the corrals kind of similar to bike racks. Would we, as a city, for would we as a city consider putting a corral zone or somewhere for some of these businesses? Like, I think it was maybe Councilor Dumont who mentioned that some of these businesses in downtown don't have private property enough to put these scooters. So like, for example, V Pizza or like Lynch's right there, there's that public, the bike rack is across the street on City of Jack's Beach property. Would we consider putting a corral there? So is it kind of, there's going to be city corrals? Is that a possibility, or is that something we don't want to explore? Or should we explore that to help some of these businesses, you know, attract scooters and also keeping them off the right of way?
That would be a policy decision for council. We could certainly look at doing that if council so choose. And maybe that's something that when we come back with some pen to paper, we throw a couple alternatives out to see what they look like. Chris, do you feel you got enough input from council to start putting pen to paper?
Yep, I've had pen to paper for a couple of weeks already, and we're going to keep on going. Thanks, Mike. Absolutely, we got a ways to go. This is an interesting one, but we have lots of resources to draw from. We already have a folder with lots of good research that we've gathered, and we're going to continue working. We'll come up with something. Does council have a particular plan for us moving forward? I mean, would you like for us to have another briefing after perhaps you have some more time to look at some of this on your own? I'll provide you with the update on a chart of the caps and numbers of devices and vendors and scooters from some of those other cities. Which way do we go with this? Do you want me to come forward with a first working draft of an ordinance at a public agenda meeting? What would you like to see next?
I personally like to see a draft just to see where the city stands, and if there's any more corrections that we can make to it, we move forward, or if there's anything else we need to add. For example, if let's say a year from now, when the ordinance is passed and we say we put a max of 3 businesses and 100 scooters, if we could revisit, okay, we're able to handle more scooters, or no, we can't handle any more scooters, we're going to leave it as that. That's just what I was thinking.
Okay.
Councilor Jansen, followed by Councilor Golding.
Yeah, I'm not to belabor the point. I think that an initial draft at a briefing would be nice. That way we can openly talk about it and then kind of move forward instead of put it in front of a council meeting at this point.
Councilor Golding.
Agreed. I'd like to see a draft at a briefing before we do anything beyond that.
Good enough. Will do.
Fantastic. Next time you see it, we'll be at a briefing in a draft format. That takes us into our final item tonight, which is Chapter 5 Animal Code. Chris, do you want me to just turn it over to you, or since I've already talked enough on this topic tonight?
Sure, Mike, I'll do it. I'm ready. Take one stack and move the stack here, move that stack there. Let's do it. We got Chapter 5 stack.
And I see we also have the police department, Chief Smith and Riley Jacob from Animal Control are also on the meeting tonight as well.
Yes. And a big thank you to Riley. As you all know, and I've mentioned it before in our meetings, Riley has a very difficult job. I always mention that it takes a heart of gold, and she's the perfect person for that job. I don't know how she does it. Not only does she do that job, but she also contributes a lot to the research and the drafting and the writing, and as well as Tanya. So a big thank you to the whole team for working on this. So we prepared the ordinance, and that was submitted for council's review, but we didn't get past the first reading, and we essentially tabled it, postponed it, deferred it for more opportunity to research and allow council to make contributions to it and comments on it. So the briefing item had the ordinance attached. And this briefing is the opportunity for the council as a body to give their opinions on the ordinance and changes, revisions, amendments, what you'd like to see. And I know that this is a very large ordinance. This was a big overhaul. Almost, I guess it was a full repeal and replacement. So there are a lot of elements to it and a lot of information. One thing that we did to help this along for purposes of making it clear for you in a comparison, we have a comparison chart that shows you essentially the primary changes that took place between the old animal and fowl code and this new proposed ordinance animal code. And the comparison chart is a good key to follow to get an idea of the most significant changes and the most pertinent relevant changes. So the comparison charts are for you to utilize to help you kind of work your way through the weeds there, rather than just give you a full red line version, which would look, like a bloodbath. But use the comparison chart. I'd be glad to walk through the comparison chart with you. Riley gets big credit for working on the comparison chart, and she can also, of course, walk us through any of that. And remember that the purpose of redrafting this really stemmed from the needs that our animal control department and animal control officers have in the field and in performing their duties and their functions. So that was the main motivation behind it. Also that it happened to be very outdated and it didn't provide everything that our police department needed. And Riley and Tanya were aware of more modern provisions in other animal codes. And so we all worked on that together to bring their code, the one that they operate in, up to speed and more modernized for them. There were other topics that we needed to address more thoroughly, and we did that. One, of course, being definitions, and the definitions weren't accurate, very adequately provided. We provided much more definitions. But there's been a lot of changes. The comparison chart will show you that. And I'd be glad to listen to council. And again, Riley and I are here, GP's here. I don't think Tanya's on, but Riley's there.
Hey there, everyone. Does anybody have any questions for me? I know the chart is pretty self-explanatory, but I'm more than willing to go over anything you guys need from me.
And I just wanted to also add, each of the council members should have received.
Mike, you're on mute again.
There we go. Technical difficulties. You should have all received an email about a week ago on the 19th. Councilor Golding had provided some supplemental information, some of her comments and thoughts with regards to the animal ordinance, recognizing that the council can't have a conversation outside of the sunshine, but recognizing she had also participated quite heavily in Duval County's animal ordinance. She and I had a conversation and thought it would behoove everyone if she condensed her thoughts down to the 2 summary pages, and she also provided the backup information as to questions and or areas that she had some comments on. So this way, each of the council members would have an opportunity to see it in advance of having a conversation if you had any questions for her, if there's anything that she wanted to go into an explanation on.
That's right. And then lastly, Mike, the final bit of information that you were provided was essentially the leash law comparison chart. So the leash law chart considers Atlantic Beach, Neptune Beach, and us in terms of leash law for dogs in general and at large in the public, and dogs on beach. And so I needed to get some direction from you on that as well.
And I see the first hand raised is Councilor Dumont.
Thank you. On section 5-27, the second paragraph, you note that authorized personnel performing their duties requires, may ask if a purported service dog is required because of a disability and what work or task the dog has been trained to perform. How does that align with HIPAA? I don't know if legally you can ask someone what their disability is.
Legally, you cannot ask what their disability is. You can ask if the dog provides a service for them and how do they provide that service. So they can't ask what the actual disability is, but you can ask them how they provide the service to help the said person on their disability.
That's kind of like a walk around, right?
Yeah, it's a walk around, but that's the only way that we can ask those questions.
Okay, thank you.
Councilor Jansen.
So on the very last chart, let me say this. I like to see the continuity between Neptune Beach and ourselves, or all the beaches, quite frankly. That way there's no distinction in the sand, if you will. But on that very, very last chart, that's kind of comparing the cities. The only question I had is really simple. Is the miscellaneous application law that Neptune Beach has in reference to the exemption to the leash requirement. Do we have that in place for Jacksonville Beach?
We do not. We can definitely add that. That's a good thing to add just for the exemptions of the service dogs and cadaver type dogs. I believe that was added to our leash section, but I don't think it was actually defined as well as Neptune had it.
I'd like to see it that way. I mean, being the larger of the beaches and having our own PD, the size that we have, I'd like to see that added into it. And that's copy and paste as far as I'm concerned.
Okay. Definitely.
Councilor Golding.
Thank you. So I apologize that I had so many questions and suggestions, but as Mike said, this is an area that's really important to me, and it's something that I've been involved with for quite some time. So I would like to at least get some answers to some of the questions that I had. Would the council members be fine if we walk through some of these questions that I had in the memo that I sent out? Okay. So I guess just starting at the beginning, the definition for animal shelter was changed from what we had originally, and it added in that an animal shelter could be an individual or a person who rescues, shelters, or provides a foster home facility. I guess my question is, why are we including that? My concern being that the whole purpose for the pet sale ordinance that we did back in 2015 was to try to address the problem with puppy mill breeders and puppies coming from breeders. And so my concern would be that if we have something in there that mentions an individual, that could cross the line and kind of, in California, they've had issues because they've passed similar legislation, and they've had issues with people operating as sham rescues, or and saying that they're a rescue when really they're a breeder. And so I guess my concern is with the animal shelter definition, including an individual like that.
The main reason for me including that included, for example, Pit Sisters and Mayport Cats. Beforehand, they used to be just a single person that would rescue and rehome animals and readopt out the animals. We can definitely add language in there that prohibits any type of breeding when it comes to that, but I'd like to keep that in there just for those type of people that are trying to start out a business but maybe don't have a name yet. They definitely help us. I know both of those businesses help us a lot when it comes to readopting animals. So
yeah, I would like to see that prohibition on breeding, and I think some other cities did that as well. So I think you could probably look at some of the definitions that other cities have done, and you could see how they included that. The cruelty definition, I was looking, and we don't reference Florida Statute 828, but I know Atlantic Beach and Neptune Beach did. So I would just suggest that we reference that, because there's a lot of things that fall under that chapter that, you know, we don't really need to necessarily incorporate, but we could just reference the Florida statutes. Is that something that you'd be?
And that's what that whole chapter was based on, was actually based on the Florida state statute. We just kind of condensed it a little bit for more of what we use in our city, not the chapter as a whole, because it's a very large chapter. We can always add that we did write it based off of that chapter, just reference it a little bit in case somebody wanted to go more in depth and read on it. But it's not necessarily needed, because we did do that for a lot of other things within our chapter, like the service dog misrepresentation and a couple of other things, but it's definitely something we can add if we need to.
Yeah, Atlantic Beach and Neptune Beach, their definition is just super simple, and but it just adds the reference to the Florida statute. So you could look at that and just see what they've done. We might want to do the same. And I was wondering about the purpose of the $100 fine for a dog or cat in heat. Are we doing anything with that money? That
I'm not sure. I'm not the finance person, but our main reason for adding that fine is just because it is an emergency type situation. A lot of times when I write citations for people with their dog in their hot car, and I only write them a $50 ticket, they just kind of look the other way. No,
I'm sorry. This is a dog or cat in heat.
Oh, you're talking about in heat.
Yeah, so that.
Oh, okay. Wrong one.
Wrong heat.
The reason I ask is because I know the city of Jacksonville had an increased fine, but that's because they put that money into a trust fund that they use to spay and neuter pets that come into their shelter. And so I didn't know if we had that increased fine and we have intentions to use that money in a similar way, perhaps.
That would be a policy decision.
Yeah, I was going to say that is not something up to me. I believe that was put in there just because it was written similar to Jacksonville's. But that is solely up to you guys. That is not a decision for me to make, because I know that we don't spay and neuter in-house, but Jacksonville definitely does, and they need the type of money for that.
Okay. The next one would be 529, persons bitten by dogs or cats. We referenced the city health officer, but I'm not sure who would be that person.
Our city health officer is actually Robert Burke. He works for the entirety of Duval County. I didn't want to put his name in there just because that position does change from year to year, depending on who's
saying it's Duval County. It's Duval County.
Yes.
Okay, got it. Okay.
Correct.
Should it be Duval County Public Health Officer then, maybe? Just because I guess to me, it made me think it was a Jacks Beach Health Officer, so I wasn't really.
Yeah, we can change that just so that there's better clarification on that.
And then my second note, we said we did not include cat in the testing for if a person's bitten, so I would just recommend that we add cat.
Yeah, definitely, yes. I agree with you.
Can I talk about this one real quick? Just because I want to thank you first off for this condensed thing, but later on you mentioned that ferrets are required to have rabies vaccinations. So, and in section 2, it talks about any animal suspected of being infected. So why would we be so specific on cats and dogs and just rewrite the whole language of section 529 for persons being bitten by an animal or a domesticated animal to include ferrets and cats?
Okay, yeah, that's definitely a good idea. I think that would be better than probably just specifying dogs or cats. Just include everybody as a whole.
Domesticated animal.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's great. Great suggestion, Chet. The next item, 530 on dangerous dogs, I shared the IMLA, the International Municipal Lawyers Association model ordinance for dangerous dogs, which The reason why I'm asking that we consider adding the potentially dangerous dog designation is because, you know, I feel like our Florida dangerous dog law is a good law, but I feel like that there's opportunity to be a little more proactive. And if we have a situation where a dog does something that doesn't rise to the level of dangerous dog, but it is something that that could lead to something more serious, you know, later, that if we had a potentially dangerous dog designation, it would give us the opportunity to address behaviors that are concerning before it gets to a really bad, you know, a bad situation where there's a severe injury. And it requires that any person who has a dog that, you know, does any of these dangers behaviors that would be considered potentially dangerous, that they would have to do some things like what the IMLA suggests. And so it's just being very proactive. And there are cities in Florida who have, you know, implemented potentially dangerous dog as an option. And the state law, I believe, does allow us to do it, because we're not weakening the state law at all. We're just putting in an additional designation that we hope will proactively address behaviors before they get bad. So I'd like to ask that we consider doing that, or, you know, urge my fellow council members to speak up whether you would support doing something like that in our ordinance so that we can be a little more proactive.
Riley or Tanya, why don't you discuss why we didn't include potentially dangerous?
Yes. Okay, so my main reason for this would probably be something that's really good for Jacksonville, not necessarily for us. We're a very small city, and with that, most of my bite reports are all in person. None of mine are over the phone or over the internet as Jacksonville would do. But with the opportunity for me to do everything in person, I'm able to educate almost every dog owner, just so that their dog doesn't become dangerous, as to what they should do for behavior correction or why it happened in the first place, if we can keep this from happening again. That's pretty much why we only have one dangerous dog in our city right now. A lot of people come into compliance very quickly when you give them education and show them how to fix, rather than yell at them and continue to write citations. So it would be definitely a good thing for Jacksonville, maybe bigger cities, but for us, I don't see it being an issue or see it ever being a necessity for us to have that.
Well, I appreciate that you do that, Riley. I think that is exactly what needs to be done. And I'm so glad that you do that, because you are being proactive by doing that. My concern would be, though, that this is an ordinance that we hope will be a lasting ordinance for a while. I mean, we obviously didn't change this for many, many years, but when you're not here, we may not have someone who is quite as proactive as you. And so I just feel it would be a good thing to have something in there that gives us the ability to address issues before they get too serious. So that's my comments basically. And also too, the next comment I had was about the exemptions for police canines and service dogs. That was something that both Atlantic Beach and Neptune Beach had in their code, but we don't have in our code. So I would like to suggest that we add that in there. It's something that is in state statute, but
yeah, and the canine part is definitely in there. I know that I've seen that within the new rewrite. I do not think that we have service animals, so just making sure that both of those are actually in there.
Okay,
yes, I agree with that.
Okay, wonderful. Section 538, the defecation disposal. So later in the, or I guess actually, sorry, in 524, there's mention about an affidavit. So could an adult witness, because this happens a lot, you know, I'm at the beach and I see somebody who lets their dog poop on the beach and they don't pick it up. I mean, based on what we have in 524 4A, could somebody like sign an affidavit? And could an owner who doesn't pick up after their dog, you know, be fined for not picking up after the dog?
I think that that's something that can definitely happen. Most of the time I ask for 2 just so that there is no discrepancy as to whether or not this happened or not, and the neighbor's just mad at the other neighbor and wants to write an affidavit on him. We usually like to get 2. And if there's video footage, we like the video footage even better because that's a lot more clear and you can tell exactly who the person is and what time that they were there. So it's a lot easier to write a ticket based off of that if they were to try and contest it.
Okay, so you can do that then?
Yes.
Awesome. Okay, thank you. Section 539, running at large.
Before we get off 538.
Sorry, go ahead.
Would it be prudent to move 533, 2 and 3 to section 538?
I skipped that. Yeah.
3, both involve animal defecation, and 538 is about defecation disposal. So to me,
right. One of those is actually just for nuisance purposes, saying this is a recurring thing that happens more often than it wasn't just a one-time thing. For example, the neighbor just lets his dog go out almost every single day and lets him defecate on his property. That allows us to have a higher fine in that section than it does in the other section where it's just for the disposal reasons.
Okay. The other one is on the defecation disposal 538. Is that one where we would consider changing the individual dog language to animal? Because I've seen other animals besides dogs on the beach, and I've seen other animals besides dogs defecate on the beach. And so it seems like we only have it, you know, if it's only a dog in here, then what's about the other animals that could possibly, that I've seen do that before.
Right. Most of these are just for dogs because most of the time you don't see a cat on a leash walking around out on the beach.
Yeah,
it
was like awful leash. Somebody just brought it down, you know, they brought the cat down to the beach. Oh, yep. Put a cat on the beach, and then it goes to the bathroom on the beach and it just gets left.
Yeah. So with that, would you want to change the language about almost everything in the chapter that includes dog to include all domesticated animals?
I don't know. That would have to be a decision for all of us.
No, I wouldn't suggest that, but we can change 538 to animal.
Okay.
Well, I guess I would ask the question because I thought that our code had something in there about only dogs are allowed on the beach, and we said, you know, like other animals. Are we allowing other animals on the beach? I think in our beach code, maybe, Chris. I seem to recall, I think we had some kind of restriction in the beach section of our code.
I know that you're allowed to have at least dogs and horses. Other than that, I'm not quite sure. I don't know if there's an exact that says nothing else is allowed on the beach. But at the end of the day, if somebody brings their cat and it's on a leash out onto the beach, I'm not going to cite them for it. So,
Sandy, I remember that conversation too, because I'm like, if I could ever get Shields into a leash, even though they say that he would like them, you know, I can't bring them to the beach now. So it's like, why try?
Well,
and I thought we couldn't have horses on the beach.
Yeah, and I know that I brought up the fact that we had a goat on the beach at one time because someone had told me about it. And so I believe our beach code does have some restriction on what animals can be on the beach.
Yep, there is in chapter 6, section 6-3 currently, it shall be unlawful for any person to have or allow any animal to be on any portion of the public beach. Dogs are exempt from this prohibition to the extent expressly provided within this code of ordinances.
Okay, great.
Okay, so the bigger issue, if you see another animal on the beach, is that it shouldn't be on the beach. Yeah. All right, cool. All right, I'm good with that.
Okay, so section 539, running at large. Are our ACOs trained to use chemical capture equipment?
We are not. We
Okay.
included that in the event that we would have that education, just because surrounding counties do already have that education for their officers, but we do not. That's placed there just for in the future. If we do get that, it's already placed in there for us.
Okay, perfect. The reason why I asked about that was because there was an issue in Jacksonville, and that's the point of my comment after that regarding veterinary care, because there are, and I've actually seen it for myself, and you probably have too, when a dog is chemically captured, an ACO can't necessarily know how much of the medication to actually give that animal. And there have been dogs that were running, of course, and in Florida in the heat, when they are chemically captured, they can go into medical distress because of the amount of medication that they've gotten and their physical state because of running and in the heat. So the issue with Jacksonville was that there needed to be veterinary care provided. So I would just, my thought would be that if we have anything about chemical capture in our ordinance, that there be something about veterinary care also for any animal that we chemically capture, or something to make sure that we don't have a situation where, and in this particular case, the dog died in Jacksonville. So I just wanted to mention that for you to consider. And then also in that same section, we have in there the statement that the animals shall be picked up. And I wanted, and this, I know this wasn't in my notes, but I came across this after I sent out the notes, but do you do any return to owner in the field, Riley? Like, for example, if you find a dog and then you know where it belongs, you just go ahead and return it to the owner, or do you have to impound it if you pick it up?
Most of the time I try not to impound it. I try to even just with my windows down, kind of drive around the place, because a lot of times the dogs will alert you when you're near the house, or you hear the owner calling for Oliver, and then you just take them right back home. I try to do that a lot before taking them back to the kennel, because I know they don't like being there. So that's usually my first resort. And
so I guess to my point that I mentioned before about in the future, when Riley Jacobs is not our ACO, but somebody else's, I would suggest that we change the language that in 539, and I'm trying to find where it is exactly, but it says something about shall be picked up to may be picked up, so that an officer, has the option to not necessarily impound the animal, but could do exactly what you do.
Okay. Yeah.
And then section 540, leash required for dogs in public places. The way it's worded, it seems to exclude the beach, and I wanted to ask about that.
I think that was our way of trying to make it similar to the other two beaches, because they do not include the beach in theirs, but they also do not say specifically that they don't include the beach in theirs. So we just kind of did that as an extra precaution, just because there is a whole entire section for the beach. But we can always take that out, but at the same time, it doesn't do any good, nor does it do any bad having it there.
It's redundant.
Yeah, it's just redundant.
I guess my concern is, as a citizen, if I read that, that tells me that my dog can be off leash on the beach because it's excluded. So for clarity, I would say that I would suggest that we don't have excluding the beach in there. Okay. That's my suggestion. Then, okay. The requirement for sales of dogs and cats. This is an area that I really want us to be really careful, because I'm concerned about opening any loopholes. I feel like we had a good ordinance when we passed it in 2015. So I guess my first question was, why did we change this from what was passed in 2015?
The only reason these were changed is because they were updated to match the other two beaches areas. they have almost the exact same thing as we do with a slight change in some of the wording. So I wanted to go off of what they had and just make sure that it's all updated as a whole. A lot of it wasn't changed. We just kind of added more definitions and just maybe changed a couple of the ordinances, but I didn't want to super overhaul this area just since it was just redone. Yeah,
so my other comments then were kind of based on the fact if we go with what you've done, I would like to see that the 542(1)A includes pet dealer in the prohibition of pet sales, because the pet dealer, you know, is somebody that sells animals. And so we had that in the original for a reason, because we just wanted to make sure that we didn't have, you know, breeders allowed to sell animals, you know. So I would just add in what we had in our previous code with the pet dealer in there in that sense.
Okay. Yeah, that's fine.
And the exemption for animal hospitals, I guess I'm not sure that you see my comment. I don't know if it's necessary, since I don't know if they would actually meet the definition of a pet store. So I just didn't know if we really needed to have that prohibition or the exemption, I'm sorry.
Yeah. And I think it does any harm or any good in that situation as well, just because some hospitals may decide they want to adopt out some of the animals that they have. Some of them may decide that they never want to do that at all. So we can keep it or we can get rid of it. Either way, I don't think it will hurt us. So.
Okay. And then the prohibition of retail sale in public places like yard sales or parking lots or parks. That's something that I've seen other cities have included in their ordinance. And I think that it could be important because they may not, you know, yes, we don't want them being sold in pet stores, but we probably don't want them being sold in parking lots or parks either. So there is language that other cities, you know, it's very standard that I found in other cities that I could send you if that's something that.
Okay, so would this exclude adoption events, or is this just for solely sales of animals?
It's just for sales.
Okay. Okay.
It's all part of a you know, this particular sale of dogs and cats.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Then yeah, I don't think that would be much of an issue then. My only issue was, would that exclude adoption events? And if it doesn't, then I think that's perfectly fine.
And that's where the next bullet comes in about the adoption-based business model definition. That definitely, when that's included too, that clarifies that everything, that all the sales that we want to have happening in our city are adoption-based. Okay. So I can send you that language as well too. Okay. Or actually I did, it's in attachment B.
I was gonna say,
yeah. 543, the abandonment. I guess it just concerns me, and I wanted to ask you about this because it sounds like you would have to wait 48 hours before you could consider an animal abandoned. And if they are left in a home that's empty, which we know this has happened because several years ago when I was volunteering at the shelter, there was a dog that was there because it had been abandoned in a home here in Jacks Beach. And so my concern would be waiting 48 hours is potentially too long to wait if the animal is not in good shape because they've been there, you know, and you don't know exactly how long they've actually been there. So I wanted to ask you about your feeling about waiting 48 hours, or do you have the ability to do something sooner?
So I kind of agree with you on this one. This was actually initially written to say it was up to the officer's discretion. And one of the previous board members asked that we added the 48-hour notice on there. So I'd say it's up to you guys now. I don't believe he's on the board anymore. So, but he asked that we had added that because he didn't think that anything under 48 hours would be deemed an emergency situation where we would need to remove the animal.
Right.
Then I
think it was another council member, but also I think Mr. Nichols also agreed with that council member. But anyhow, I don't have a problem if we leave it with the discretion of the officer to determine And that doesn't put any time limitation on the officer. The officer is the most qualified in the field to make that determination anyway.
Yeah,
So
I
if
agree.
you ladies are comfortable with that, I'm comfortable with it.
I totally agree, because I would hate to think that your hands would be tied, Riley, and you couldn't do anything, and a dog is in distress or whatever, you know?
Right.
And then I also wanted to ask you, based on the way our code is written, you know, if we return any community cats after they've been TNR'd, is that considered abandonment based on our code and based on how you read the code?
I don't think it is, because community cats are feral cats. They're not owned by anyone. So there's no way that someone could abandon it, because no one has ownership of that animal.
Can I jump in there really quick since we're on this topic instead of waiting? Do you mind, Sandy?
No, go right ahead.
Okay, so I don't have the notes, but I was reading about the animals and who's considered the owner. It's the individual who, like, if it can be an outdoor cat, but if you're always feeding the outdoor cat, it's kind of considered your cat. A lot of these feral cats, you have people who are just always feeding them, and why are they not considered the owners of these? I guess it wouldn't be a feral cat at that point, but it's kind of a slippery slope. So how are we really distinguishing between feral cats and people putting food out for them versus I have an outdoor cat? Mm-hmm. Because he won't come in, just like the feral cats.
And that's a problem that I come in contact with almost every single day, because there are people that want us to pick up animals and provide vet care for them, but then they also admit to me that this animal lives on their property, doesn't go anywhere else, and it comes inside at night. And so, well, technically it's a feral cat, but at the same time it also is your cat. So a lot of times I have them either give me their rabies or any of their vet paperwork to prove that they are the owner. And if they can't prove that they're the owner, then it has to be assumed that it is a feral cat, and we kind of proceed from there.
Okay.
Yeah.
I would think that it would be more of somebody saying it's not their cat. So why would I give you the paperwork? And so this way you can do the,
yeah,
the city would pay for the, whatever the medical treatment is. It'd be the catch and release. It ends up back in my backyard.
Mm-hmm. It's a very gray area, and it's something that's very difficult for me to handle, but I'm still very open to options for that.
It's just a thing I had a question about. I never said that I have the answers.
Ms. Dumont, we've also had problems not just with cats, but raccoons too. People feeding raccoons, and they come by the dozens in the people's yards. So it's almost kind of the same thing. We could prohibit the feeding of feral or wild animals, period, but I don't know how Chris feels about that.
No, I'm not saying we should. But my neighbor up the street, we call the cat Spice, and we just assume it's his cat, but never goes inside, hangs out in my backyard and on the furniture. It's just that slippery. I wouldn't want to say that nobody can feed them, because once you do that, feral cats are often, people put food out for the feral cats. Like groups go in to the feral cat colony and give them food. I wouldn't want to ixnay that.
We have a lot of those. I know that.
Oh yes.
Where are they?
And I could have sworn that we have something in our code that talks about what's considered, or when someone is considered an owner. Do we? I thought we did.
Yeah, the owner is if they spend time on your property, or if you feed them, or like they come around often. Spice is always here, and sometimes I give her some food and some water and such, but she's not our cat. She just hangs out here, but she hangs out next door and in the house next door. She's a well-fed cat. And I'm not even sure that's her name. That's just what we call her. She probably has multiple names too, lots of aliases. So try tracking her down.
Okay, so should I move on? All right. Section 543, tethering, attended tethering legislation from Jacksonville as well. And also I shared that there is right now this year, there is movement to have attended tethering passed as a state law. I don't know, because it's the first time this has been introduced, you know, I don't know that it'll be passed, but I'd like to suggest that we consider adding code that Jacksonville has for attended tethering to our code. Do you have any thoughts on that, Riley?
Yeah, I don't see why we shouldn't add it, but it is one of those things that we most likely will not use.
And that's okay.
Yeah.
That's okay. But if we need it, we'll have it. That's my thinking. Right. Yeah. Right. Okay, perfect.
We only have one dog that's tethered in our city right now, and I know them very well, and they're very good about bringing their dog in, providing shelter, things like that. But it is always something that we can add just for in the future if we ever do need it.
Okay. Cruelty to animals, 544 4A. I really appreciate the fact that you added the tethering in two or more locations if a dog is going to be carried in the back of a truck, a bed of a truck. I found another ordinance that also adds that they, and I realize that maybe ours is okay, and maybe the way it's written, you think it's fine, but I thought we could add confined in a well-ventilated crate or cage of the proper size would also be permitted. Aside from just tethering them in the bed of the truck, it should be okay to have them in a properly sized and well-ventilated crate or cage. So maybe just add that language there.
I wouldn't mind adding that. My only concern is that it's very difficult to enforce because some people may think that something's a very well ventilated cage when you think about there's no wind in the bed of a truck. So how is that actually well ventilated? They're kind of just baking in an oven underneath the sun on hot days. It's really circumstantial. We'd kind of have to sit there and inspect the vehicle as the call comes. But we can add it, but it's very difficult to enforce.
So are you talking about making that as two parts, that it's tethered in addition to being in a?
No, it could be either or. They could either be tethered or they could be in a crate in the back of a truck for safety. Yeah.
Sandy, would the crate be secured?
Yes.
So the crate would be.
Well, and actually, so yes, you're right. It should say, yeah, crate that's secured. Yeah, a secured crate, yes. In 546, impounding of animals. I just had a question about feral cats that are temporarily sheltered for TNR. You are doing that, right? I mean,
yes. So this section is mainly for, a lot of people like to call and ask, why can't we pick up raccoons? We have nowhere to take raccoons. I have nowhere to hold raccoons. They would shred through the bars like it was almost nothing to them. This is mainly for that reason, and also for the reason of people wanting us to pick up animals after they've been TNR'd. We are not required to hold them. We can if need be, but there's no reason for us to hold those animals just because they need to be back outside in their environment. This was not made to exclude anything pre-TNR, because that is, it hasn't had its shots or any type of spay or neuter at that point.
Could we put like some exception language in there that just says this excludes cats that are part of the community cat program, or cats that are you know, being TNR'd perhaps? Just because, I mean, if you're not there, again, Riley, that's my thing. I mean, I'm so glad that you do what you do, but somebody else may not. And I will tell you that we have had animal control officers prior to you many years ago that wouldn't do wouldn't do what some of the things that you're doing. And so I'm very grateful that you do what you do.
Thank
So
you.
I just want to make sure that we make sure that future animal control officers continue the good work that you're doing. 5.4. Oh, Fernando, did you have something that you wanted to add in, or you want to add in? I mean, you're muted. Fernando, you're muted.
We can't hear you.
Oh,
Yeah.
gotcha. I could wait until after you get done. Mine was in regards with the misrepresentations of service dogs.
Okay. Okay. I didn't know if you needed something on this. Okay. Owner surrenders. It's just a technicality, but JACPS is no kill now. And so I just don't know that we really need to put that language in there about them being a kill shelter. I would just, I'm recommending that we remove that. I don't know that it's relevant to state that.
Have they officially come out and say that they're no kill, or are they still technically no kill?
Well, I know that for the last several years, their annual save rate has been over 90%. I think one year they did drop down below 90% to like 88. But I guess my thought is, I don't know that having anything in there about whether they're a kill shelter or not is, I don't know if it's necessary that we have that in there.
The only reason I put that in there is because Jacksonville requires that we tell people, even if it's not in paperwork, that they are still technically a kill shelter, just so that they know, hey, this animal may be put down and most likely won't be, but we still have to tell them that that is an option that may happen if they choose to surrender their animal, so that they don't assume that they're going to see their animal on the website 2 weeks from now up for adoption.
Well, and I think, again, I think it's fine that you tell them that. I don't know if we need to have that memorialized in our ordinance, but that's just how I feel about it.
Okay.
And then what's the purpose of the $150 surrender fee if the animal is not spayed or neutered?
So this is actually copied from Neptune Beaches, because we've been working with them and also surrounding rescues to actually start adopting through us instead of having to take everything downtown and swamping their shelter. So if we require this at the time of owner surrender, we can use that money to take it to the vets to have them actually spay and neuter for us, and then we can re-adopt out from here instead of taking it downtown to be stuck in the shelter with way less publicity. Wonderful.
I love it. Thank you. I love it. Okay. Conditions preventing redemption. It's just wording, but I mentioned before, I would prefer to see us say may be expeditiously and humanely euthanized versus shall. So that gives you discretion depending on the, I know that some illnesses, I know you said that some animals can survive those illnesses. Some of them, they may not survive the illnesses, but I'd like that to be at your discretion. So I prefer the may instead of shall, so that you have that discretion. You don't have to euthanize an animal if it can be treated.
Right, so it was put that way because it does say previously before that in the sentence that is determined by a veterinary. And if they do determine that the animal is redeemable, it does say may be redeemed, so that animal would go home. The only reason we would keep that animal is because it would need to be euthanized in that situation, which is why it's worded and it says shall be euthanized, because there's no reason why we would be keeping the animal if it was perfectly fine to go home. Does that make sense?
I'll be right back. Sorry, I'm taking a restroom break. Be right back.
Okay.
I guess I'm not sure I follow it, but.
So if we take an animal to the vet's office and we know that this person wants the animal back, and it says may be redeemed, and the veterinary decides that it has to be put down, then in that case, the animal would not be redeemed because we would have to euthanize it.
And I guess my point is that if the owner would like to get the animal back and treat it, then I would like to know that they would have the option. I guess I'm just thinking if my dog ended up in the shelter and it was determined to have parvo, I would like to have the opportunity to treat it myself, as opposed to it being euthanized because a vet says it has parvo, and
Right, and that's why it also says determined by a vet. Again, it doesn't say that we have to take it to the vet and the vet decides it has parvo. That doesn't mean the dog's going to get put down. It means, does that vet think that it has the ability to bounce back from this disease, or do they think that it does not have the health ability in order to make its way back up to 100% health, or even 50% health, to still be an animal in a sense and not have to be euthanized? It wasn't put there to say, hey, this animal has parvo, you can't have it back. It's, hey, this animal has parvo and it will not survive, or hey, this animal has parvo but it will survive if it has
See, Jamie
medication. Oh yeah,
sorry. Jamie is coming to add her 2 cents. Okay. My point is, I just feel like May. I prefer May, and that's where I stand on that. The rabies certificate Chet already brought up. Since the ferrets are required to have rabies vaccinations, can we add that ferrets need to provide? That owners of ferrets need to provide proof of rabies vaccination as well?
Yes, I think we should change that to be similar to what we agreed on earlier, to say all domesticated animals, so it includes everything in that one too.
Okay. And also Atlantic Beach and Neptune Beach provide exemptions for animals that cannot be vaccinated due to health reasons. Can we include that language that either of those cities have as well?
Yes, I completely forgot to add that, but it's something definitely want to add in there.
Okay. Confinement with rabid. The National Rabies Compendium allows animals to be quarantined in their home as opposed to in a shelter. I'd like to see us add that to our code as well.
Okay. I don't think it was written to prohibit that, but we can change it if we need to, because we do at-home quarantines within our city. We don't always keep it at the kennel if we can help it, just because it just traumatizes the animal more than it has to.
Yeah.
But I don't think it blocks it, but if it does, we can go back and reread it and make sure that it doesn't.
And maybe it just, maybe if it just includes some language that just says that maybe at the ACO's discretion, at-home quarantine is permitted or whatever, just because if you're not there, again, I want that to be an option. And then the rabies quarantine period, I know we stated in the definitions or somewhere earlier in the chapter that the rabies quarantine is 10 days, but here it says 14 days. So could we change it to 10?
Yes, I think that was our error, that it wasn't updated properly as to what it was before. But as of right now in Duval County, it is 10 days. So it needs to all match together fluidly to 10 days.
And then the last thing, pet limit. I know we've got our pet limit in the land development code, and maybe Chris, you can explain why the pet limit is in the land development code, because I know that's so confusing. And I would have thought that would have been in the animal code. And then secondly, why do we have a pet limit? I know Atlantic Beach and Neptune Beach don't specify a pet limit, nor does Jacksonville. And I want to put that out there, that if we want to, that we should consider being consistent with our neighboring communities.
I'd like to move the pet limit out of land development code and put it into our animal code.
That would be wonderful, because it really is confusing. Every time I've gone to the animal code, I'm looking, and I'm like, wait, where is the pet limit? And I had to ask Chris Wright, and she told me where it was.
Okay. Did she give you a specific section number?
Yes, it's in the land development code 34-392.
Yeah, I have it.
But again, if we choose to not specify a pet limit, then we just, you know, then you don't need to move it to Chapter 5, but we would remove it from the Land Development Code.
I think former Board of Adjustment position, I think the reason why I was in the Land Development Code was for veterinarian services, boarding, because we've had a couple of businesses that applied for variances to be built for boarding. And there was another animal related business, I can't remember what it was, early on in Board of Adjustments. And I think that's the only reason I could come up that it was in the Land Development Code, just for a matter.
Right. Actually, thank you, Counselor. That makes perfect sense because it is under accessory uses. So that actually.
But that would be for a business, though, right? It's
pertaining to all zoning districts.
But if it were, like Dan were saying, if it were a kennel or a boarding facility, that seems like it should be. That definitely would be in the Land Development Code, but I guess for ownership, residential ownership, I don't know.
Yeah.
I think we've all agreed that the LDC needs to be updated.
Yeah. Oh boy. That's yep. We sure do. So yeah, we'll look at that. We'll look at 392, number 2, under household pets. Under LDC.
And thank you, fellow council members, for humoring me and as we go through all of this. But as Chris said, this is a pretty major rewrite, and I do appreciate all the work that you all have done, especially you, Riley, and all the work that you continue to do. You're doing great work, and I just want to make sure that for a lot of this, I want to make sure future officers continue to do what you're doing. Thank you.
So I know it. I'm sorry, Councilor Mezzo, you were waiting patiently. Go right ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, no, just one question. I know I sent an email right after we had this, I think it was a briefing of the council meeting about the misrepresentation of the service animals. And I know it happens all the time at some of these businesses where, were we able to mimic the ordinance that Jacksonville just passed?
We can definitely do that. I believe that ours was actually copy and pasted from Neptune Beaches, just because theirs is a lot shorter and more condensed. Our main reason for putting this in is not only for our businesses, but mostly for people on the beach. A lot of people, especially during the off hours, during the summertime, when they know they're not allowed to have pets out there, will slap a vest on and say, hey, this is a service dog, even though the dog's running around not helping any type of person whatsoever. But we have nothing against it that says they can't be there. So it's very hard to enforce.
But we, Mr. Manager, we do still have, I believe, the intention, which is that we do have penalties there and punishment, enforceable punishment with respect to someone who knowingly misrepresents the dog as being a service dog. Is that what you were concerned about as being the main purpose?
Yeah, I just want to make sure that people are not taking advantage of going online and getting these permits, pay $20 or whatever it is, and then they're going out to the beach like she was saying, or to these businesses, and it just undermines actual real service dogs that are people actually using that needs the help, and it doesn't help that cause. And you know, when you get someone that actually has a real service dog that was trained, you know, it's hard to believe it, even though you have to follow the rules. But you know, and I just want to make sure that we're somewhat mimicking the ordinance in Jacksonville or Neptune Beach, I guess.
Yeah, I think ours is in there, and I don't think our officers confront that too often. But also, this I think the way we have it drafted, it enables them to have broad discretion in how to handle the particular situation and investigate the situation. And then if they find that there has been a misuse or a misrepresentation, they can prosecute it.
Okay.
But I agree, that's right, it's pretty despicable.
Did you want to add something in there that excludes emotional support animals from this section? Because a lot of people like to say that their ESA is considered a service dog when it is not in the state of Florida. And that's the thing where you go online for 20 minutes and get the certificate.
I was reading I went on the website and I was reading that some emotional support dogs weren't considered actual service animals. I just can't remember the section of it.
Yeah,
so if we could do something.
Yeah, no ESAs are considered service animals unless they went through the proper service animal class to get that certification. Normal ESAs are just the 20-minute online class that you go to, you get a sticker that says you can take your animal on a plane with you. So that's completely different than a service dog certification.
Okay.
We can add some language there. We've talked about that in the past during our drafting of this in several forms. We'll look into adding more language there.
Councilor Stokes?
I can go after Chris. He had something right before Fernando. If Chris, you want to go ahead.
Go right ahead. Mine's just going to be a final question about leash on beach.
Oh, that was actually mine.
Okay.
So I kind of wanted to sorry, my dog's piping up right now. Kind of wanted to see why we're changing from 16 feet to 8 feet. And if what the reasoning is, and then I can follow up if there's follow-up.
Sure, because I'm glad that you brought it up, because I was wanting, I know it's been a long briefing, but that's a topic that I really needed to hear from the council on. And honestly, we came to an 8 because Mike and I talked about it, and we're putting it forward to council to see if that's what would be suitable, and for a council to make the determination of what length leash you do want. And that's why Mike came up with the brilliant idea of having a chart that provides you with Atlantic Beach and Neptune Beach, and for you to tell us what to do. But we did change it from 16 to 8. 16 seemed very long. And I'll just let you know that Riley and Tanya put together a great video. I know it's been a long night, we don't have to show it, but a great video that showed the 8-foot, a 12-foot, and a 16-foot leash distance. The 16-foot leash was quite long and could be very difficult. Almost, I don't know how a owner could control a dog from 16 feet away on a leash. So we suggested reducing it by half, and that brought us to 8. But quite frankly, as the chart shows, that's not necessarily consistent with our neighbors. And Councilmember Jansen's commented that he'd like to see us consistent with our neighbors. Understandably, I get that. And we need council to provide us with direction on that. So right now, Atlantic Beach is at a 12-foot leash maximum, but the dog may be allowed to swim unleashed in the water, but immediately after swimming must be put back on the leash. And Neptune Beach requires a 12-foot leash, controlled at all times on the leash. And then of course, we've changed ours from 16 to 8, but we've also allowed for the dog to swim unleashed, but immediately after swimming must be retethered, releashed. So we need council to tell us if you want us to remain consistent with our neighbors at 12 feet, if you'd like to keep it at 16 feet, or if you'd like to reduce it to something else lower, perhaps 8.
Well, since I asked the question, I like the 12 feet, not the 8 feet. As an owner with a dog who likes to run, 8 feet is not a lot. But 16 is, to your point, very difficult to control a dog who likes to run. So I think the 12 feet consistency is good. And then I do really like the dog in the water, because I know when I go out to the beach and you see the dogs in the water, they're all having a great time. And it's impossible to be leashed, have a leash with your dog running in the water. So I vote for the 12 feet, and I like adding the dog in the water provision.
Great. Is everybody giving me a head nod for 12 feet or anything different? No? Ms. Golding has a different opinion.
Yeah, as a dog owner, I walk my dog on a 6-foot leash, and I definitely don't support the 16-foot. That's for sure, because there's no way that somebody can control it. I don't think 8 feet is bad to require people to have their dog on an 8-foot leash. I understand the consistency with Neptune Beach and Atlantic Beach, but I mean, I would love to see the video if the video's short. I mean, because the video might convince me otherwise, but at this point, I'm not leaning towards 12 feet, and maybe the video might help me change.
I would recommend the video before y'all make a decision.
Okay. But just to be clear, at this point, the other 5 members are suggesting 12. I mean, directing us with 12 feet. Okay, understood. Okay.
I don't have any animals, so I am going to base my decision on my fellow colleagues here and take it from there, and the video.
Fine. We have a majority of 12, but then Jacob, I believe, do you have the video for the council members?
Can I just, before we go further, we have to think about what the purpose of the leash length is. Is it for the dog's pleasure, or is it for the safety of the individuals who are around the person who's on the other side of that leash? And I think it's the latter. I love seeing happy dogs running around and all that stuff, but the whole purpose of the length is to protect people who are by the person with the dog. I've been in runs. It was a Chariots of Fur. I think it was the first year, the Chariots of Fur. It was the worst run I've ever had because everybody had these long leashes and I kept tripping over them. I had no dog. I had no dog in the race. If we're looking at the beach, and so is the video just like, is there some kind of a thing there that could really denote like how close people would be at the beach and what 8-foot, 12-foot, 16-foot leash, how that would impact other people, since we're talking about the beach. That's how I'm looking at this. So I'm more towards the 8-foot allowed off in the water, back on as soon as out of the water. But that's kind of how I'm looking at it, because it's really for the safety of the individual, not for the fun of the dog.
I just don't want to see Jean Paul with a measuring tape on Seagate Avenue when they cross over the line. Yeah.
It does also say not to exceed. So, you know, there's definitely nothing wrong with a 6-8-foot leash if you need to control your dog. But I do agree that public safety is got to be paramount. So let's see the video, and I might even be convinced otherwise. So.
Thank you, Councilor Jansen. I appreciate it.
I forgot that. So choppy.
So Riley, if you want to provide any narration that could help the council members, if you feel it necessary.
Yeah, that's fine. This is a very well-trained dog that we have. This is actually our chief's dog, Bella. She does very well on a leash, no matter what the length is. So it's not too hard for them. If it was a busy situation, she'd easily be able to call her dog back to her with no issues there. Our main issue with 8 and 12 feet is the fact of owner control. And when there is a dog that is very hyper and wants to go meet other dogs, it's not necessary that the other dogs actually want to come and see them, and you end up with a fight, or you have people that don't like animals that are out on the beach and the dog's walking up to them, sniffing them because the owner can't pull them back because it's 12 feet instead of 8. It's a little bit too long for them to be able to pull that control back in. And a lot of people use extension leashes. When you give them the 12-foot opportunity, they will go out and buy the extension leashes, which most of those are a minimum of 16 feet. Most of them don't come in 12 feet. So when you require 8, there's a less likely chance that they're going to have those type of leashes, and they're going to let the dog go out further than they should. And then this is our other dog. Her name's Sadie. She is a little bit more hyper. And as you can see with any type of leash, no matter what it was, she wanted to go up. She wanted to say hi to almost every single person who maybe didn't actually want to go say hi to her. So it's very circumstantial. And I think it very well benefit us if we went down to 8 feet, whether I know it's not like the other 2 beaches, but at the same time, they are mostly private properties and mostly residential areas, whereas we have a lot of touristy areas, a lot of hotels, a lot of people coming from out of town that don't really maintain proper control of their dogs like the other 2 beaches do on a regular basis.
I will say I wish extension leashes were outlawed. I think they're the worst things for.
I agree.
I stick with 8. For all of the reasons why Riley just mentioned.
We have 2.
I agree.
Councilor Meza, followed by Councilor Golding.
8.
I agree as well. I think Riley brings up really great points. We are the place where all the visitors go, and we have so many people on the beach. If I go to Neptune Beach, it's never as busy as Jacksonville Beach or Atlantic, or as Jacksonville Beach is. Atlantic Beach doesn't have the public parking that we have. Neptune Beach doesn't have the public parking we have. And I really, you know, like I said, I walk my dog on a 6-foot leash, and I think 8 feet is definitely controllable. But I think if you start getting longer than that, it is a public safety issue. So I'm 8 feet, and I agree with in the water, off leash, but have to be leashed immediately out of the water.
I'm willing to change my vote to 8 if for no other reason than to keep dogs from tripping Georgette as she jogs along the beach.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
I'm happy to help.
Well, I appreciate that. That's already 4 council members that have expressed 8, and that's the way it's currently drafted. So I respect Mr. Jansen's position that, you know, it's nice to kind of keep it consistent with our neighbors and give a break. But I've had 4 of my 7 council members at least say 8. So I guess we have to leave it as 8 the way it is.
I think you've got a consensus for how it comes back to council. And obviously, if there's a motion to amend, it'll be considered at that point.
You got it.
Do we have any other comments from council on Chapter 5? Wow. Okay. Well, then that takes us to the end of our council briefing for tonight. Riley, I presume you got the direction that you needed on that final item?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Jansen, I see you have a hand raised.
You're muted.
Muted.
Yeah, sorry. Just before we separated for the night, I wanted very briefly just put it in front of our minds about the tax increment funding. I know that date's coming up on us quick. I've met with some of the councilmen in town in reference to that as well. So I don't know if Mike, if you have that plan for a briefing in the near future or not, but I just wanted to bring that back up to attention.
Mayor, why don't you speak on that, and then I'll follow up with what the status of that is.
Yeah, thank you. I was actually going to bring up the reminder that none of us were, unless we've been designated to speak on behalf of this body, we shouldn't be representing the council on issues such as the tax increment funding, things like that, unless it's something that we've voted on and you're supporting the council's voted on position, or like I mentioned, are designated to speak on it. So I'm not sure the nature of the meetings that you've been having, Dan, but just there's really no one should be negotiating or discussing the specifics of returning tax increment funds to the county at this point, because that's a negotiation point that we have at this juncture that we could be using to our benefit, but we need to decide as a council what that's going to be before we start pursuing that.
Sure, there was no in-depth detail, but sure, I understand.
Thank you.
Just to provide a status to council, you may recall that before the holidays, there were some conversations with the CRA. They wanted an opportunity to weigh in with a recommendation to council as to what should be done with the South End CRA TIF going forward. I basically double checked with Ashley as the finance officer from a timing perspective. I informed the CRA that my intention was to bring the ordinance in front of council for consideration at the first meeting in March. And that would give the CRA 2 meetings in January and February to have conversations and potentially make a recommendation to the city council about what they thought should be done going forward. So that's my intention at this point in time, is to bring forth the ordinance for consideration at the first meeting in March.
Can I say one thing before we sign off? Chris, I really am glad you kind of brought up the designating somebody to speak as a body, because I know we talked about that not soon after us new councilors were elected. And I know with us wanting to do the strategic plan and all that kind of stuff coming up, it's kind of been put on the back burner. But I do think, especially when we're working on the strategic plan, it's going to be important that we have a council representative on specific issues. So I would like to kind of put that back on the radar and at least get a list so we can start thinking of what we'd like to be appointed to as individuals. So thank you for bringing that up, Chris.
Can I just jump in real quick to follow up on chat? That's really up to the consultants on how it's going to be designed, and then how they're going to break everything down, and then what our role will be in the process.
Good with that?
Okay, I think that's going to wrap up our council briefing for tonight, 8:17 at night. Everyone can go home and have a late dinner and go to bed. Thank you all.
We all are home except for Chris.
Yeah, just a reminder, next Monday's council meeting will be held in the council chambers in person, starting at 6 p.m. And Chris, do we have the closed door meeting next week, or is it the following meeting?
No, it's next. It's closed session on February 16th.
Perfect. So it's the normal meeting time of 6 p.m. during COVID. Got it. Okay.
That's right, 16th, and I just remind you that's a Tuesday because of course President's Day on the 15th Monday.
Correct. Okay. Everybody have a good evening. Thank you all.
Good night.